Thanks, Ella.
Now, briefly take us through the issues, or the cause rather, of the latest confrontation between Israel and Palestine.
That's actually a very good question, because this kind of eruption took place seemingly without great cause. So you had the issue a few weeks ago of three young Israeli settlers who were kidnapped, who disappeared. The new stories coming out are that the government actually knew that they were dead, but didn't announce it, didn't make it public, because that gave them the excuse to conduct the operation across the West Bank, where hundreds of people were arrested, houses were broken into, etc., as well as the beginning of the bombing raid on Gaza. Mm-hmm. When some Palestinian groups from Gaza then responded to that with rockets, that intensified. So the past 3 nights, you're seeing pretty intense kind of bombing from the Israeli side onto Gaza.
Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the murders of the Palestinian youths and promised that he will prosecute those responsible. Do you think that we can trust him to do just that?
Well, it's not up to him to prosecute them. Of course, they'll go to court. Palestinians, of course, are saying that nevertheless there's a kind of imbalance. So you had those 3 Israeli settler youth that were killed, and when 2 Palestinians were suspected of it, who are still on the run, they haven't been tried, found guilty or anything. They were suspected of it. Their family homes were demolished. The same thing, of course, doesn't happen in the case of Israelis when they killed very brutally. I mean, they burnt him alive, this 16-year-old boy. When they killed him, they in prison. So there's unhappiness about that kind of response from Palestinians, certainly.
Is the international community speaking out against Israel for the Israeli airstrikes on Gaza?
Not really. I mean, usually when this kind of thing happens, there's always the kind of propaganda and, you know, who fired first, etc. Mm-hmm. The international community is, in general, being careful about making comments about this. But I think that what we have been seeing over the past few months, at least, if not the past year or so, is that the appetite of the international community, particularly of the Western countries, for Israel's excesses, that appetite is decreasing. Mm-hmm. So even Barack Obama, for example, has been complaining about the attitude of the Israelis after the kidnapping of those 3 boys and the heavy-handed approach, etc., which you wouldn't have had a year or so ago. Mm-hmm. And I think that increasingly that's becoming a problem for the international community.
Israel has been complaining that Hamas is shooting artillery deeper into Israel. But do Hamas, and they have also vowed really to take revenge on the Israeli attacks, but do they have the artillery and the military, shall we call it, impetus to really take on the might of Israel?
Well, the quality, let's say, of their rockets that they've been using has certainly increased over the past 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. So the rockets that they're now using have the capacity to, as you said in your mm-hmm. intro, to reach Jerusalem, to reach Tel Aviv. They're not guided missiles by any stretch of the imagination. So that's why thus far, with I don't know how many 100 rockets that have been fired over the past 3 days or so, none of them have actually hit any serious targets. One, I think, hit a school 2 days ago, 3 days ago, in the middle of the night, so no one was injured, but there haven't been any serious targets. So they're certainly able to reach further into Israeli territory than ever before, but they're not guided, and so they're kind of wayward missiles, if you like.
The Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas, has called to appeal for international help. Can the international community really assist in this regard and making sure that there's peace in Israel? I mean, it's been many years now, decades, so to speak.
65 years, yes. Well, I think the international community must play a role. At the moment, there isn't any such role. I mean, the Americans, thus far, their kind of so-called peace process has generally been a process that is favored towards the Israelis. Mm-hmm. That is well and truly dead. There's no such peace process. I think in the immediate term, what is required is some kind of third party that would help in order to broker a ceasefire Hamas and Israel don't talk to each other, so you need a third party. The Egyptians are no longer interested, or not interested at the moment, because they have their own problems, I would guess. So you need a broker that will broker a ceasefire between the two. There's indications that both might go for it. But in the longer term, you do need a process that's going to be able to look at the legitimate demands of the Palestinian people, look at the Israeli position, and come to some resolution around this. Israel is not really interested in a resolution because it has the upper hand at the moment. And as long as it has the upper hand, it is able to increase its settlement building in Palestinian territory, in the West Bank in particular, essentially steal more and more land. And that's why Palestinians are, for example, calling for a kind of sanctions campaign like we had, boycotts, divestment, sanctions, in order to put pressure on Israel so that there would be a greater sense of balance. Because at the moment, well, there's no balance. Israel's the stronger party, doesn't care.
So in essence, this entire fight is about land and land grab from Israel, so to speak.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about territory, yes.
Now, what do you think, if we look at the entire story, Na'eem, about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, what needs to be done to really bring peace between the two? Now, you've mentioned some things that can be done, that we need a third party, but is that essentially it?
Well, you need a negotiating process, and you need goodwill on both sides. The Israelis the Israelis need to have a fair negotiation, like in the South African case. The stronger party needs to be brought down the ladder a rung or two. But the negotiation process needs to focus on the core issues. And the core issues are the borders of the State of Israel, because Israel, for 60 years has not declared its borders. It imagines its borders to be wherever it would like. The issue of the right of return of Palestinian refugees, about 6 million Palestinian refugees that languish in refugee camps, and who have the right under international law to return to their homes. The issue of the settlements, all of which in the West Bank are illegal under international law, and under international law should be dismantled. The issue of Israel's control of water resources in Palestinian territory, in the West Bank in particular. These are the issues that need to be dealt with directly. The manner in which the negotiations has taken place thus far is that these issues keep getting postponed. And so let's talk about these other little things here and there, A few
talk about
here,
3 kids, yes, teenagers being killed.
And so what you do is you extend the so-called peace process into a process that will never really realize peace. Until the Israelis in particular are willing to talk about these core issues, you're not going to get anywhere. So you need the kind of pressure from the international community that's going to force the two sides to the table and say these are the issues, they need to be dealt with. They need to be dealt with in terms of international law and not in terms of the wishes of this or that party.
Mr. Jenah, thank you once again for your insight.
Thank you very much.
That was Na'eem Jenah. He is the Executive Director at the Afro-Middle East Centre here in studio with us. Now, it's time for your sports news. Last night it was a blitzkrieg. Kendall Makamate has all the details.
Thank you very much, Elvis, and a hearty good morning to you all. The time being 1:45